One might argue that if Linnea had trusted the bond in her own chest, instead of the whispers poured into her ear, she would never have run at all. But then again, if the Alpha King had ridden home a single week sooner, there would have been no whispers left for her to trust. So really, when a person sits down and untangles the whole sorry knot of it, the blame comes to rest in one place, and that place wears a crown. Every thread of it. The histories would say, in the years that followed, that she fled Drenmore because another woman had come to carry the king's child. They would call her proud. They would call her broken. Some would call her both, and pour another cup. What not one of them ever said, because not one of them knew, was that when Linnea walked out through the low gate and did not look back, she carried a secret she had not yet dared to name, and a future no one had thought to promise her. The morning the world ended, Linnea was on the west wall of Drenmore before the second bell, because she had never in her life learned how to sit still and wait for good news. She had come up from nothing. A smith's daughter, with a dead mother and a father who drank the forge cold. She had talked her way into the training yard at 11, and never once left it. By 20, she was the finest blade in the Low Country. By 25, she was shield captain of the whole Royal Guard. The first woman ever to hold the post. And if the older men grumbled about it, they did so quietly, because she had put 3 of them on their backs in the yard on the day she was raised, and none of them cared to try for 4. She knew every stone of that fortress. She knew which stair sang under a boot, and which sally port stuck in the wet, and which of her 200 guards would be sharp at dawn, and which would need a hard word before they were fit to stand a watch. What she did not know, what she had never once in 7 years of service let herself fully believe, was that the king loved her. Her guards would have walked into the cold sea for her, though she would have been the very last to say so aloud. She had hauled young Perrin out of a frozen mill race with her own 2 hands the winter before, and had stood a double watch beside a grieving man, so that he would not have to stand it alone, and had never once mentioned either afterward. She led the way most people breathe, without ever quite noticing she was doing it. Praise made her itch, gratitude made her want to leave the room. The one thing on the whole cold earth that could reliably undo her was being truly wanted. And so it was the one thing she had spent a lifetime making very certain she never let herself need. And yet, he did. Rurik, Alpha of Drenmore, Lord of the Northern Packs, a wolf so strong the very air seemed to bend around him when his temper slipped, had chosen her. Not a high-born lady with a dowry of grain and grievances. Her. He had felt the bond snap into place between them on a cold hunt 2 winters back, a hook set clean through the center of his chest, and he had turned his horse around in the snow and looked at her as though the ground itself had moved. She had felt it too. That was the trouble with a true bond. It did not care in the slightest what a person deserved. It simply arrived and made itself at home in the one soft place a hard woman had spent her whole life keeping locked. They were to be wed at the turning of the season. In 3 weeks, she would kneel a shield captain and rise a queen. She had sent the seamstresses away twice already. A crown, she kept thinking, was a great deal of gold to hang on a smith's girl, and every night she lay in his arms half certain she would wake and find it had all been a fever, that men like Rurik did not, in the end, keep women like her. The blow came while he was away. A border dispute in the Far East had called him off with half the guard, and Linnea had stayed behind to hold the seat, because that was what a shield did. On the 9th day of his absence, Odile came to her rooms. Odile of House Varn was the nearest thing Linnea had to a friend among the highborn. She had been kind when the others were cold, had stood at Linnea's shoulder through 100 stiff dinners, and taught her patiently which fork to lift and which lie to smile at. So when Odile came in gray-faced and would not meet her eyes, Linnea's stomach dropped before a single word was said. "There is a woman," Odile said. "Ilaria, a pretty thing come up from the summer court. Linnea, she is with child." "The king's child. It happened before you, they are saying, or perhaps not before. I could not bear to ask her. But her belly is not a rumor. I have seen it with my own eyes." Linnea reached, without deciding to, for the bond. And here was the true cruelty of it. Rurik was leagues away, muffled by all that distance. And what came back to her down that thread was not love, and not denial, but a low, closed, guilty silence. The feel of a man holding something back. She did not know he was holding grief for dead men on a battlefield. She only knew that he was holding something, and that Odil's face was wet, and that a child does not lie. She sat down on the edge of her bed after Odile had gone, and she did the sum the way she did everything, coldly and completely. A king needed an heir. The realm needed a queen. The great houses would kneel to without grinding their teeth. Not a smith's girl with sword calluses and no name to speak of. Ilaria, whoever she was, gave him both in a single stroke. Set against all of that, a bond was a small and inconvenient thing. And Linnea had always known, somewhere down beneath the armor, that small inconvenient things were forever the first to be quietly set aside. Pride is a poor blanket, but it is the only one some people are ever handed. Linnea did not weep in front of Odile. She did not weep at all, not then. She thought about the crown of gold and the smith's girl and the fever she had always known would one day break, and she decided that she would not stand in a great hall in 3 weeks and be pitied. She would not watch the man choose the mother of his heir over a bond he had never asked to feel. She would leave first. Leaving first was the one small power the powerless ever kept. Odile wept and begged her to stay and fight for her place, which Linnea would remember much later as a very fine performance indeed. She helped Linnea to a ship instead. A trader bound north across the grey water for Ostvale, a cold, hard kingdom at the ragged edge of the maps where no living soul had ever heard the name Rurik, and no one would ever think to look. Linnea stood at the rail as Drenmore sank into the dark behind her. One hand pressed flat to her own stomach over the second secret, the one she had only that dawn begun to suspect and had told no living soul. Not grief alone. A child. His. Hers. And she carried it out into the black water and left the king his crown. 7 winters is a very long time in a hard country. Ostvale did not welcome her, it tested her. It threw storms and raiders and a wasting sickness at the foreign newcomer, with the sword and the swelling belly. And Linnea met each one, the only way she had ever known how, which was standing up, and it was the standing up that the North came in time to love. She fought in a shield line when the ice reavers came howling down the fjords. She organized the grain when the sickness emptied the villages and the highborn fled to their hills, and she sat with the dying herself when no one else would. When the old king of Ostvale, Halvard, a childless widower with a failing heart, looked around his cold court for someone the people would actually follow into another winter, his eye did not land on a cousin or a dupe. It landed on the foreign woman who had bled for his people and never once asked him for a thing. He named her his heir before the whole assembled court, and when he died quietly in his sleep the following spring, not one voice rose against her. Linnea, the smith's daughter, who had crossed the sea with nothing but a blade and a secret, was crowned Queen of Osvale beneath a sky gone white with gulls. She had earned every ounce of the gold on her brow. No man had handed it to her. No bond had gifted it. She had built it with her own 2 hands, and that more than anything else was why she could finally bear to wear it. To the north she took a northern name, as their custom demanded of a crowned head, and so the woman called Linnea became, in the cold histories of that country, Queen Sunhild of Ostvale, and she had not built it alone. The boy had been born in a stone room with the wind screaming at the shutters near 6 years past now, and she had named him Bram, for the bramble that grows stubborn where nothing softer will. He had her chin, and her way of going dangerously quiet when he was furious, but his eyes were not hers. They were a pale, wolfish gray, the gray of a winter sky in the last moment before it breaks, and on the nights she let herself remember, she knew exactly whose eyes those were, and she held her son a little tighter and told no one at all. Bram knew that he was a prince. He did not know that he was anything else. Linnea had decided on the deck of that trader in the dark that her son would grow up whole and wanted and certain of his place in the world, And she had kept that promise the way she kept all of her promises, which was completely across the water. Drenmore was not well. The Alpha King had come home from the eastern border to find his shield captain gone, his intended vanished into sea air, and a woman named Ilaria in his hall, swearing his child grew in her. He had known at once, the way an Alpha always knows his own blood, that the child was not his. He had never once touched her. But the true bond in his chest, the one that mattered, had gone silent and cold and one-sided overnight, and no amount of roaring at the empty sky ever brought it back. He tore his own kingdom apart looking for Linnea. He found gray water and a cold trail, and in time, a wall of his own pride to stand against the ruin of hers. He did not remarry. He did not take a mate. He ruled grimly and well, and grew hard and thin and quiet, and his own court took to whispering that the Wolf King had left his heart lying on a border road somewhere and never gone back to fetch it. Then in the 7th year, the ravens came south, carrying a hard truth. A power was rising in the far east, an old enemy grown new teeth, and Drenmore could not hold the eastern reaches alone. Rurik's council, wringing their soft hands, laid a single word before him: Ostvale. The northern kingdom had grown strong and stranger under its new queen, and its shield line was the terror of the cold sea. An alliance with Ostvale would guard Drenmore's whole flank, and might be the only thing left that could save the realm. A delegation would have to be sent, terms would have to be begged, and the king himself should go, they said, for a proud northern queen would take an insult from anything less than a crown. Rurik, who had not crossed his own borders in years, agreed because a king who will not cross water to save his people is no king worth the name. He did not know the name of the Queen of Ostvale. Not one soul at his court did. She was a distant northern legend, a warrior woman crowned on merit at the edge of the sea, and the regnal name meant nothing to him. He boarded the ship, a tired man going to beg a stranger for help. The great hall of Ostvale was carved from black stone and lit with 100 cold lamps, and the whole of the court stood in ranks of fur and iron when the doors groaned open, and the Alpha King of Drenmore walked in to make his plea. The queen sat on a high seat at the far end of it, still as carved wood, a circle of pale gold on her brow, and a boy of perhaps 6, seated close on her right. Rurik crossed the long floor with his head high and his careful speech ready, the practiced words of a proud man come to ask, and he lifted his eyes at last to the woman he had come all this way to bargain with, and the whole world stopped. He knew her before his mind would let him say it. The chin, the set of the shoulders, the small white scar on the back of one hand that he had kissed 100 times. 7 years older, harder, colder, a stranger in a queen's crown, but her, unmistakably, impossibly, her. The bond, silent and dead in him for 7 full years, cracked open in his chest like river ice in a thaw and drove a single fact through him so hard that he very nearly staggered in front of the entire northern court. Alive. She was alive. She was here, she was crowned. Linnea looked down at the man she had loved and buried, and never once truly stopped grieving, kept her face perfectly, queenly, murderously calm, and said in a voice that did not shake, "Welcome to Ostvale, King Rurik. You have come a very long way. I do hope, for your sake, it proves worth the crossing." A queen does not fall to pieces on her own dais, and it turned out that neither did a king. Rurik found his voice. He gave the speech he had come to give, the alliance, the eastern threat, the shared old blood of the northern packs, and if his words came a half-beat slow and his eyes never once left the queen's face, the court took it only for the awe that any man might feel before the black throne of Ostvale. Linnea heard almost none of it. She was too busy, keeping her hands still on the arms of her chair and her son's true name off her own lips, because Bram had leaned forward with a child's frank and fearless curiosity to study the big grim visitor from the south, and the visitor had not yet once looked at the boy. And Linnea intended to keep it precisely that way. If she had to set fire to the hall to manage it, she granted the delegation guest rights. She could not do otherwise, and hated that she could not. The eastern threat that Rurik spoke of was real. Her own scouts had brought her word of it a month past. A queen who let an old wound cost her people their safety was no queen worth the gold she wore. So she smiled the cold court smile that Odile herself had once taught her in another life, and gave the king of Drenmore and his men the East Tower, and swept out of that hall before her legs could think to betray her, her son's small hand held tight in hers. That night, her own council put the unthinkable on the table before her, the surest alliance, her chancellor said. Choosing each word with care is one sealed in blood. King Rurik is unwed. Your Majesty is unwed. A marriage between the two crowns would bind Drenmore to us past any treaties breaking, and no warlord in the east would ever dare the both of us joined as one. Linnea sat very still, and thought that she would sooner swim back across the grey water in the dead of winter with her crown in her teeth. But she was a queen now, and no longer only a shield. And she had learned the hard way that the plain word no is a luxury a crown can rarely afford to spend outright, so she did not say no. She said, "We shall see," and hated the taste of the words in her mouth. Rurik cornered her, the next morning in the cold gallery above the sea, because of course he did. "Linnea," he said, and the sound of her true name in his mouth after 7 years of silence very nearly took her knees out from under her. No one had called her that since the ship. To the north she was Sunhild. To her son she was mother. Linnea belonged to a dead woman and a drowned country, and the man now standing between her and the grey window, with 7 years of grief and fury banked in his pale eyes. "You will call me your Majesty," she said. "Or Queen Sunhild, if the first should stick in your throat." "You will not call me that. Why did you leave?" The question came out of him raw, stripped bare of all his careful kingcraft. "I looked for you, for years. I turned over every stone in the realm, with my own hands. You vanished as though the sea itself had opened and swallowed you whole, and you left me." His voice cracked, and he mastered it with visible effort. "You left me. So tell me why." She could have told him. About Ilaria, about the child that was and was not, about Odile's wet face and the guilty silence down the bond. But she looked at this hard stranger, wearing the face of her lost love, and she felt the old wound throb beneath her ribs, and pride, that poor thin blanket, wrapped itself around her shoulders once again. "You had everything you wanted," she said coldly. "A kingdom, an heir, on the way. I merely spared us both a scene. Now we are two monarchs with a treaty to weigh between us, and nothing more than that. Do not mistake this for a reunion, King Rurik. I buried you a very long time ago, and I do not intend to dig you up." She left him standing there in the cold light, and she did not let herself run until the heavy door had shut fast behind her. The danger announced itself on the third night. The two courts dined together in the Black Hall, a stiff and glittering affair. Drenmore iron seated hard against Ostvale fir, and Linnea sat her son far down the table with his nurse and kept the king of Drenmore 3 seats down her own side, near enough to watch and too far to be made to speak with. It was somewhere in the fish course that her wolf lifted its head beneath her skin. She had learned, in a hard country, to trust that feeling long before she could put a name to it. Something was wrong in the room. She let her eyes travel without turning her head, over the servants, the guards, the seated guests, and then she found it. A serving man she did not know. Knew wrong. His hands held too still, his eyes fixed on the high table, a folded cloth over one forearm that hung far too heavy for a cloth. He was not looking at her. He was looking at Rurik. Linnea was out of her chair before the thought had even finished forming. Later she would lie awake and wonder why she had moved so fast to save the very man she had told that morning she had buried. In the moment, there was no thought in it at all, only 7 years of hard instinct, and a bond she had sworn on her crown was dead, hauling her bodily up, out of her seat. She caught the serving man's wrist as the blade came clear of the cloth, turned it against the joint, and put him face down across the fish with a crash that stopped every heart in the hall at once. The knife skittered away across the black stone and came to rest, of all places, at the boots of the King of Drenmore. Rurik looked down at the blade. Then he looked up, at the Queen of Ostvale sprawled half across his end of the table with a would-be assassin pinned flat and struggling under one hand and her crown knocked askew on her brow, and he said, very quietly, so that only she alone could hear it, "Some things, it seems, do not change so very much after all." Linnea did not answer him. She was staring at the pinned man's forearm, where his rough sleeve had ridden up in the struggle, at the small mark inked deep into the skin there, a mark she knew. A mark she had last laid eyes on 7 years ago, in a warm country on the far side of the sea, pressed into the green wax seal of House Varn. The would-be assassin died before he could be made to speak, not by any blade in that hall. He bit down on something tucked behind his teeth the moment the guard's hands closed on him, and he was gone across the black stones before Linnea could so much as demand a name of him. A man willing to swallow poison rather than talk is a man who fears his master a great deal more than he fears his queen, and that alone told Linnea a good deal, none of it good. She had the body taken away quietly, and the hall cleared, quieter still. She sent Bram off to his rooms with a doubled guard, and a kiss and a small lie about too much excitement, and she did not let herself shake until she was entirely alone. Then she looked again, in the light of a single lamp, at the small mark she had memorized off the dead man's forearm. 3 thorns crossing over a closed gate. The seal of House Varn, Odil's house. The house of the one high-born friend who had wept over her and packed her onto a ship and waved her off into the dark 7 years ago. Linnea sat with that for a long, cold while and told no one what she had seen. She did not yet understand what it meant. She only knew that it meant something, and that until she understood it fully, the knowledge was the one weapon she could not afford to hand to anybody, and least of all, to the King of Drenmore. Rurik came to her war room at dawn, uninvited, and found her already there, bent over a map of the eastern approaches with 2 of her captains, running the knight's failure to ground the way she ran everything, coldly and completely. "I would speak with the queen," he said to the room, and her captains looked to her and not to him, which she watched land on him like a small blow. She dismissed them with a nod. When the door had shut, he did not sit. He stood across the map table from her, and for a moment they were only 2 people who had once shared a bed, staring at one another over the painted rivers of a kingdom. "Someone drew a blade on me at your table last night," he said. "In your hall, under your roof. I would like very much to know who." "So would I," she said. "It is my hall, my roof. The insult is mine, before it is ever yours." She held his gaze. "Did you know the man?" "No," he said. And she watched him say it, and she thought, with the old instinct that had never once failed her, that he was telling the truth and hiding something in the very same breath. He had not known the man, but he had not been surprised by the man either. A king who has never been hunted goes white when a knife comes clear at his dinner. Rurik had gone, still, focused, ready. This was not the first blade that had come for him, and he had carried that knowledge all the way across the gray sea, folded up small, where no one would think to look for it. "What are you not telling me?" she asked. "I might ask you the very same," he said, and neither of them answered. And something almost like the old understanding passed between them. 2 hard people, each guarding a locked door, each of them recognizing the lock in the other. They worked it together in the days that followed, because there was no one in either kingdom either of them trusted more, and that was its own bitter joke. Linnea set her scouts on the harbor and the roads. She had the dead man's clothes searched, thread by thread, his boots cut open, the soles of his feet read for the calluses that would tell her whether he had come by ship or by horse. She questioned the kitchens without once frightening them, moving through the servants with the easy authority of a woman who had herself once been a servant and had never forgotten the view from below. Rurik watched her do it, and she felt him watching, and she hated how much of her still wanted, after everything, to be seen doing a thing well by precisely that man. "You have gotten very good at this," he said quietly. "Somewhere in the second hour, I was always good at this," she said. You simply never got to see the whole of it. You saw a shield captain. This is a kingdom. She did not look up from the ledger of harbor arrivals. It turns out the second is only the first made larger. He was quiet a moment. Then, lo, I am sorry that I never got to see it. She let that lie where it fell. But something in her chest, the thing she had welded shut on a ship 7 years past, gave the smallest treacherous creak, and she pressed her thumb hard against the ledger and read the same line 3 times over without taking in a single word of it. It was Rurik in the end who found the thread. He had a hunter's patience and a hunter's eye. And when the harbor rolls turned up a trader out of the southern ports that had put in 2 days before the feast and slipped its moorings again the very same night, he tapped the entry once and said, "There. That ship. Whoever sent our friend last night is already halfway home to report that he failed." "South?" Linnea said, and her stomach went cold. The southern ports meant Drenmore's own waters. It meant the blade had come off his coast and not hers. It meant, though she did not say it aloud, House Varn. She looked up and found him already watching her, and she had the sudden certain sense that he had come to that same conclusion long before she had, and had watched her arrive at it, and had said nothing at all. "You know who sent him," she said. "It was not a question. I have a suspicion," Rurik said, choosing the word with care. "Nothing I can lay before a council, nothing one clever man could not argue his way clear of. And until I can, I will not say a name aloud, not even to you, especially not to you." His jaw tightened. "There are houses in Drenmore too old and too well loved to be touched on a suspicion. Move against one of them without proof in your hand, and you do not get justice. You get a war in your own streets by the next new moon. I learned that lesson the hard way a long while ago, and I have been paying the debt on it ever since." It was a good answer. That was forever the trouble with him. His answers were good and reasonable, and always just slightly too smooth, and they always left her standing on the wrong side of a shut door, certain there was a whole room behind it she was not being shown. "So this is why you truly came," she said slowly. "The alliance, the treaty, all of it. Not a threat in the east at all, but a hunter driving his quarry north toward friendlier ground. The threat in the east is real," he said. That much was never a lie, but it was never the whole of the truth either, she said. Was it? He did not answer that. He looked at her across the map of her own kingdom, with 7 years of grief and something a great deal more dangerous than grief in his pale eyes. "And," he said, "instead, you are the most alarming woman I have ever known. I had forgotten." "No, that is a lie as well. I never once forgot. I only told myself I had, because forgetting was the single way I could make myself get out of bed in the mornings." And there it was, sudden and plain and wholly without defense, and Linnea felt it go through her the way the cold sea had gone through her 7 years ago, and she took a step back from the table before her own body could take one forward. "Get some rest, King Rurik," she said, and her voice was very nearly steady. "We hunt your traitor in the morning." She left him there among the painted rivers, and she did not run this time, but only because she no longer entirely trusted her legs to carry her fast enough for it to matter. The hunt for the southern ship took the better part of a fortnight, and a fortnight, as it turned out, was more than time enough to undo the careful work of 7 years. They were together constantly now, and there was no help for it. A queen and a king, running a conspiracy to ground, cannot do it at arm's length. They bent over the same maps. They rode the same cold roads out to the harbor and back. They took their meals standing over reports, and slowly, without either of them deciding to permit it, the old rhythm crept back. He would say a thing dry and awful, and she would refuse to laugh and lose, every time, at the last moment, the corner of her mouth giving her away. She would catch him, watching her across a room, and he would not look off, which had always been the unfair thing about him, that he never had the decency to pretend he had been caught. The worst of it, the very worst of it. She had kept the two of them apart, with all the ferocity of a woman guarding the last true thing she owned. But a palace is only so large, and one gray afternoon she came looking for her son, and found him in the lower gallery, sitting on the cold floor across from the King of Drenmore. The pair of them bent over a game of carved stones, arguing cheerfully about the rules. Linnea stopped in the doorway and could not make her feet carry her forward. Rurik was losing, badly, and on purpose, and Bram was crowing about it, and the boy had his head tipped at an angle. Linnea knew better than her own name, an angle she saw in her son every day and had spent 6 years refusing to name, and Rurik was looking at that small tipped head. Something puzzled, something reaching. The face of a man who has caught a scent on the wind and does not yet know what it is, only that it has hooked him behind the ribs. Bram, she said, too sharp. The boy looked up. It grows late. Say your good night. Rurik rose. He looked at her over the top of her son's head, and for one terrible heartbeat, she was certain that he knew, that he had counted the years the way she had counted them, that the whole of it was about to come down around her. But he only said, "He plays a vicious game of stones, your prince. He gets that from someone." And Linnea's heart stopped, and started. And she took her son by the hand and fled. It broke, as these things always break, on a night when she was simply too tired to hold the door shut any longer. The southern ship had been found, scuttled in a cove down the coast. Its crew scattered, the thread gone cold in her hands. Linnea had ridden back through the freezing dark with nothing to show for a fortnight but a dead end and an ache, and she found Rurik waiting in the war room, alone. The lamps burned low, and she was too worn through to send him away. "Nothing," she said, and dropped into a chair. "The ship is an empty shell. Whoever they are careful, and they are patient, and they are still out there, and they still want you dead, and I am no nearer a name tonight than I was the night he came over the fish. We will find them," Rurik said. "You do not know that." "No," he agreed, and came around the table and crouched in front of her chair so that for once she was the one looking down at him. "But I know you. And I have never met a thing you set your will against that you did not, in the end, bring to heel." He said it plainly, the way a man states a fact of the world. It was not flattery. Flattery she could have armored against. This was worse. This was belief. "Do not," she said. Her voice had gone thin. "Do not what? Do not look at me in that way. As though I am," she stopped. "As though I am something you lost and have found again. I am not yours to lose or to find. I stopped being that on a ship a long time ago, and I have built a whole life since out of not being that, and you do not get to cross an ocean and undo it in a fortnight, because you are lonely and I am near to hand, and there is a knife somewhere in the dark with your name upon it." "Near to hand," he repeated, very softly. He rose. He did not step back from her. He said her name, and then caught himself on the edge of another word entirely. Some small worn endearment out of another life that he had not been permitted to use in 7 years, and he let it die unspoken. "Linnea," he said instead, carefully, "the way a man sets down a thing he is terrified of dropping. There has not been one day in 7 years that you were near to hand, or convenient, or anything of the kind. You have been the least convenient fact of my whole life. I built a kingdom around the hole you left in it. Do not tell me what this is. You do not know. You ran before you could find out, and I have been standing inside the answer ever since. Alone." She was on her feet, without deciding to be. They were very close. The lamps were very low. "Tell me to go," he said, and his voice had dropped to almost nothing, and she could feel the old bond straining against the door she had bolted it behind. 7 years of pressure, arriving all at once. "Tell me you feel nothing, and I will cross the sea in the morning and trouble you no more. Say it, and mean it, and I am gone by the tide." She opened her mouth to say it. She could not find it. The lie was not there. She had told herself 100 careful lies to get through 7 winters, and standing now with the warmth of him a handspan away and his grief pouring off, him and her own name finally right in his mouth, she reached for the largest lie of them all, and her hands closed on nothing. So instead, she said the true thing, the one she had sworn, on the deck of a ship, that she would never again say to any living man. "Stay," she said. and she reached up and pulled him down to her, and the door she had held shut for 7 years came off its hinges all at once, and there was no map, and no treaty, and no crown and no knife in the dark. There was only the two of them, and the low gold light, and the vast, terrible relief of stopping the fight. This was not statecraft. This was not the alliance her council wanted, nor the trap she half suspected he was building. This was only a man who had crossed an ocean of his own grief to stand before her and ask, and a woman who was, God's help her, so bone-weary of saying no, she stopped saying it. And for the first time in 7 years, she let herself be held, and did not think once of the door, or the crown, or the knife, waiting in the dark. The midwinter rite of Ostvale was older than the crown, older than the Blackstone Hall, older than anything a southern king had words to name. On the longest night of the year, the whole court of Ostvale shed the shapes of men and women and ran. It was not a hunt for meat. It was a hunt for the turning year itself, a great wild running of the wolves out across the frozen fjord and up into the white hills. The queen at its head, the way the queens of Ostvale had always run, and the folk below watching the dark shapes pour across the moonlit snow. Linnea had not wanted him to run it. It was Ostvale's right, not Drenmore's, and there was a knife out in the dark that wanted him, and 100 reasons of state and safety to keep him penned in the hall. She told him every one. He came anyway, because he was who he was, and because, he said, he had spent 7 years wondering what she looked like running free, and he would not cross an ocean and miss it. So they ran. And here was the thing Linnea had not accounted for. A wolf cannot lie. A wolf has no careful court smile, no 7 years of practice distance, no crown to hide behind. When she shed her skin and poured out across the snow, with her pack around her, and the great black wolf that was Rurik at her flank, matching her stride for stride as he had on that first cold hunt an age ago, the door she had lifted off its hinges the night before simply ceased to exist. There was no door, there was only the run, and the hard bright moon, and him, and the bond blazing open between them, and for the first time in 7 years, she let it stay open. It struck her like the sea, not her own feeling. It came pouring down the open bond, raw and unguarded, so simple and so vast that it undid her mid-stride, joy, at the plain fact of running beside her, grief, old and worn smooth. And beneath both, steady as a heartbeat, a wanting so patient, and so quiet, and so without calculation, that she stumbled in the snow, and he was there at once, wheeling back, pressing his great head to her flank, and she felt his alarm flood down the bond and chase itself into relief. Kneeling there in wolf shape with the warmth of him along her side, that it was real, that it had always been real, that whatever else was a lie, this one thing between them had never once been anything other than true. She had spent 7 years telling herself the bond was dead. It was not dead. She had only buried it alive, and it had been down there the whole time, breathing. They came down out of the hills near dawn, and there was mulled wine and hot honeyed mead waiting for the pack in the great hall, and it was in the wine that the second attempt sat waiting too. Rurik took a cup from a passing tray the way a man does 100 times without thinking, and Linnea, still half wild from the run, still wide open on the bond, felt the wrongness a half-breath before her eyes found it. Not his fear. He was not afraid, her own wolf, riding high and sharp and unwilling, after a night of running, to let anything near her mate, the scent beneath the spice, bitter green, wrong. She struck the cup out of his hand. It shattered against the stones and the dark wine ran out between their boots, and the whole hall fell silent, and Linnea was already down with her face to it, sorting the scent apart as she had sorted 1,000 scents. And it was there, plain as a printed word, once you knew to look. Not enough to kill an alpha outright, only enough to slow him. Enough to thicken the blood and cloud the mind and lay a wolf king flat and helpless for a night. And a helpless king, she thought, coldly rising, is a king. A careful knife can finish at its leisure. Poison, she said. The word went out across the hall like a cold draught. Rurik had gone still again. That terrible readiness. The look of a man to whom this was not a shock, but only the next expected move in a long and weary game. Keep it from the wider court, he said low. Only for her. If it is cried aloud that Drenmore's king was near to poisoned under Ostvale's roof on the holiest night of your year, you will have questions you cannot answer and a fear you cannot afford, and whoever wants me dead will only melt back into the dark and bide his time for a better night. I am so weary, she said, of men who would rather manage me than trust me. But she gave the order all the same, because he was not wrong, and hating that he was not wrong had become the whole shape of her days. She got him alone in an antechamber off the hall, the heavy door shut fast, the two of them still smelling of snow and smoke and spilled poison. Now, she said. No more locked doors, Rurik. Someone has tried to kill you, twice. Beneath my roof, I have just felt your heart beating. Through a bond I swore was dead, and I am finished being handled like a nervous horse. Tell me what you know, all of it. Now, and at last, he did. Or he began to. I have known, since, before I set sail, he said. The blades that keep coming, the coin behind them, the patience of it. It is no lone madman, it is a house. An old, rich, well-loved house that has spent 7 years growing stronger while I grew thinner, and that now reckons me weak enough to finish. He met her eyes and did not look away. House, Varn. The floor did not quite drop out from under her, but it tilted hard. Odile, she said, and her voice had gone strange in her own ears. Odile of Varn sits on my own council now, Rurik said. She smiles at me across the table twice a week. I cannot lay a finger on her. I have no proof one clever man could not talk away, and if I move against House Varn without it, Drenmore tears itself in two. So I did the only thing left to me. I went looking for leverage, for an ally strong enough to let me finally act. He paused. I looked north. Something cold began to assemble itself in Linnea's chest, the way it had once assembled itself in her rooms 7 years ago, while Odile stood and wept. Say the rest of it, she said. His jaw worked. My council did not send me across the sea for the sake of my grief, Linnea. They sent me to secure Ostvale. By treaty if I could win it, by marriage if I could not. By whatever hold I might still have over the Queen of Ostvale, they wrote. Whatever old attachment could be turned to the good of the realm. Those were the words on the page. I read them, in my own advisor's hands, and I sailed anyway, because it meant I would see you, and I told myself the two things could be true together. That I could want you, and use you, and it would not be a lie, because I meant every part of the wanting. The night before came back to her all at once. Stay, she had said. She had come off her hinges. She had let him in past every wall she owned, and all the while there had been a page in a council chamber with her own name on it, and a "you" set neatly beside it. You let me, she said. Her voice was very quiet now. Last night, you let me open that door with a directive folded in your pocket, telling you to do precisely that. It was not like that, he said, and reached for her. Do not, she said, and he stopped, the touch ungiven, his hand hanging in the cold air in the space between them. And she looked at him, this man she had run beside, beneath the moon not 2 hours past, whose heart she had felt beat true, through a bond she had trusted at last, and she understood she had done it again. That she had reached for the one thing she was never permitted to want, closed her hand around it, and felt the strings. Good night, King Rurik, she said, and she walked out. And this time she ran, and she did not care one whit who saw her do it. She did not sleep. She sat in her council chamber through the black hours, with the dead assassin's seal in front of her, and the name House Varn turning over and over in her mind, and by the time the gray light came up over the fjord, she had stopped seeing an assassin's mark at all. She was seeing Odile's face, wet with tears, 7 years ago, in another country. She was seeing the ship. She was seeing 100 small kindnesses she had never once thought to question. Because who questions the one person who is kind to them when no one else can be troubled to be? Rurik found her there at dawn. He did not knock. He came in and set a worn leather case on the table between them, and his face was not the face of a man come to grovel. It was the face of a man who had decided to stop protecting her from a thing, and hated that he had ever believed protection was his to give. I said I would not speak a name without proof, he said. I have had the proof for 2 years. I carried it across the sea. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment to show you. And the plain truth is, I was a coward, because I knew what it would do to you. And I knew you would never forgive the man who put it in your hands. He pushed the case toward her. I am done being a coward. Open it. She opened it. Inside were papers, ledgers in a clerk's careful hand, letters under a broken green seal she knew in her bones, and a single folded sheet older than the rest, the ink gone brown, that Rurik's own hunters had prized out of a midwife's keeping in a southern town 2 years past. Read that one first, Rurik said quietly. And the floor of the world, which she had rebuilt with her own 2 hands over 7 hard years, went out from under her all at once. The woman Ilaria had never carried the king's child. She had carried a child, that much was true, got on her by a merchant's son in the summer country, and she had been found by Housevarn while she was still frightened and unwed, and she had been paid handsomely, to come north to swear an Alpha King had fathered what grew in her, to weep in the right halls, at the right hours. And then, once the deed was done, and the shield captain had fled across the sea, to vanish south again, she had not held it forever. Frightened women rarely do. And Rurik's patient hunters had found her in the end, and written down every word. There was more. She made herself read all of it, every cold line, because she had never in her life been able to look away from a hard truth once she knew that it was there. The dates, the payments counted out in Varn silver over the better part of a year, and a single note in Odil's own unmistakable hand, instructing that the woman be kept quiet in the summer country until the shield captain has removed herself, at which point she is no longer any concern of ours. Removed herself, as though Linnea had been a stain, and Odile only the patient hand that had scrubbed her out. It was a fabric, Rurik said. The whole of it. There was never a child of mine. There was never one moment I chose another over you. I came home from that border burying men I had led to their deaths, and I could not speak of it, not even to you, and that silence you felt down the bond was grief, Linnea, only grief. And someone stood at your shoulder and told you it was guilt. Odile, she said. Her voice did not sound like her own. Odile of Varn, he said. She spent a year making you doubt, whispering that men like me do not keep women like you, that a crown would never sit right on a smith's girl, that you were a convenience I would set aside the moment a highborn belly gave me an heir. And then she manufactured the belly, and she waited, and you said every one of her words, back to yourself in your own voice, and you called it your own good sense, and you ran. Linnea sat very still. She could hear them now, all of them. Every cold certainty she had carried onto that ship and worn like armor for 7 years. Men like him do not keep women like me. She had thought it, in her own flat voice 1,000 times. She had never once wondered where the thought had first come from. But she could hear it now in another voice entirely, low and kind and patient, poured into her ear across 100 stiff dinners by the one friend she had never thought to guard against. Odile had not needed to lie to her, not truly. She had only needed to teach Linnea to lie to herself, and then stand back and let a proud, unloved girl do all the rest of the work alone. There had been a night, she remembered now, a month before the end, when she had said to Odile, half laughing, that she did not truly belong in a palace, and Odile had not argued the point. Odile had only looked at her with such tender sorrow and said nothing at all, and let the silence do the work that a spoken lie could never have done half so well. Linnea had walked away from that silence, feeling foolish for having hoped. She had felt that exact way 100 times over the years, and every single time, if she cared to trace it back now, there had been Odile, saying nothing, beautifully. 7 years, Linnea said. I gave her 7 years of my life. I gave her my son's whole childhood in a country he was never meant to know. She looked up. And you knew. 2 years. You have known. And you let me stand across a map from you and never said a word. I was going to. he said. And then, someone put a knife on your table. And the whole thing became a war instead of a wound. And I told myself again that it could wait. He met her eyes without flinching. It could not wait. I was wrong. I have been wrong about how to love you since the day I first felt the bond and decided a king does not simply get to say so. I am sorry, Linnea. Not for wanting you. Never once for that. For every single time, I decided I knew better than you what you could bear to hear. And there it was, the two wounds, the old one and the new, lying side by side on the table between them at last. The one Odile had made and the one he had made himself, keeping the truth folded in a leather case for 2 years because he thought her too fragile to hold it. She stood. She did not go to him, and she did not throw him out. She picked up the green sealed letters and squared them in her hands, the way she squared everything, coldly and completely. You should have told me, she said. The both of you. Everyone in my life who has claimed to love me decided, at one time or another, that I could not be trusted with the truth of my own life. I am finished being managed by people who mean well. She turned for the door. But that is a reckoning for later. Right now, there is a woman of House Varn who took 7 years from me and means still to take your life, and I intend to be the one who stops her. Do not mistake that for forgiveness, King Rurik. I have simply decided who I am angriest at, and it is not. Tonight, you, Odile of Varn, came to Ostvale on the evening tide, and she came smiling. She swept off the Drenmore ship in grey Varn silk, with her hands out and her eyes already wet, and she folded Linnea into an embrace before the whole harbor, as though 7 years were 7 days. I came the moment the ravens reached me, she murmured against Linnea's ear. I heard he had dragged you into his troubles, and I could not sit in Drenmore and let it happen to you twice. Oh, my dear. My poor dear. I have been so afraid for you. 7 years ago, that voice had put a knife in Linnea, and Linnea had thanked it for the kindness. She felt the old pull of it even now. And she understood at last exactly what she was hearing, and she made herself lean into the embrace and let her own eyes go wet, because a queen, who had once been a shield, knew that the surest way to spring a trap is to let the one who set it believe it is still closing. Odile did not waste a night. She came to Linnea's rooms with wine and grief and a sheaf of papers, and she laid it out, gently, sorrowfully. He is using you, she said. His own counsel sent him north to bind Ostvale, by whatever hold he had left on your heart, treaty or marriage or the old bond, whatever would serve. I have seen the directive with my own eyes. She pressed the page into Linnea's hands, and it was real, and it was true, and it was the cruelest weapon in the world, precisely because it was not a lie. He has not changed, Odile whispered. He will use you and set you aside, as he always would have. Come home to Drenmore and stand before both courts and tell them what he is. They will believe the Queen of Ostvale. And there it was, the whole plan in a friend's soft voice. Denounce Rurik before the courts. Shatter the alliance. Leave the Wolf King friendless in a foreign hall. Let a careful knife do the rest, and let Linnea's own wounded pride swing the door wide. I will think on it, Linnea said, and let a single tear fall, and watched Odile's mouth curve ever so slightly, with the satisfaction of a craftswoman whose favorite tool has held its edge. The alliance was to be sealed the next day before the joined courts, and it was there, in the Black Hall, under 100 cold lamps, that Odile expected her harvest. Both courts stood in their ranks, Drenmore iron and Ostvale fir, the same hall where a knife had come clear over the fish a lifetime ago. Rurik stood before the high seat to make the formal plea for alliance. Odile stood among the Drenmore delegation, with her hands folded and her eyes on Linnea, waiting for the queen to rise and cast it all down. Bran sat at his mother's right hand because Linnea had wanted him, where her own guards ringed thickest, and she had learned in a hard country to trust that instinct before she could name it. Rurik spoke his piece. Then he turned to the throne, as the rite required, and asked the Queen of Ostvale whether she would take Drenmore's hand. Linnea rose. The hall held its breath. Odile's chin lifted in anticipation. And Linnea, standing tall in a crown no man had ever given her, said, Before I answer, the King of Drenmore, this court must hear a thing that has been kept from it, from all of us. She lifted her hand, and her old shieldmaster laid into it the leather case, and the green sealed letters, and the brown old confession of a frightened woman named Ilaria. She did not raise her voice. She had never needed to. She laid it out the way she had once laid out a corrupt duty roster, line by patient line, until there was nothing left to argue with: the paid woman and the false child. The 7-year lie that had driven Ostvale's own queen across the sea, the coin behind the repeated attempts upon a king's life, traced ledger by ledger to a single house. And she watched Odile's lovely composed face begin, at the very edges, to come apart. "This is madness," Odile said, with a small, sad laugh, turning to the courts. "Grief has unbalanced her. She has been used by this man, and cannot bear to see it, so she invents a villain closer to home. I came here as her friend." "You came here," Linnea said, "to watch me denounce him and finish what your knives could not." She turned the confession outward so the foreign lords could see the seal. "The midwife you paid remembered your face, Odile. The captain of the poisoned cup carried your silver. And the woman you sent to break my heart 7 years ago has told my own scribes every word you fed her." She took a single step down from the dais. "You did not lie to me back then. You were far cleverer than that. You taught me to lie to myself. You taught me the court smile, and which fork, and which untruth to swallow, and I loved you for it. And all the while you were teaching a lonely girl to hand you her own life." "Search her," Linnea said to the guards quite calmly, "and her rooms, now, while she stands here and cannot reach them." And Odile, who had spent 7 years never once being caught, saw the trap close the wrong way around her, and did the only thing left to a cornered thing. She had come prepared to lose a plan. She had not come prepared to lose her head. Her hand went into her silk, and it came out with a thin, bright blade, and she lunged, not at Linnea, but sideways, low and fast, for the boys seated beside the throne. Linnea had been waiting for it. Well, not for the blade. At Bram, never that. She had not let herself so much as imagine that. But for the moment, the smiling thing stopped smiling. She was already moving. 7 years of a hard country, and a whole lifetime before it. All of it poured into the single stride that put her between her son and the knife. She caught Odile's wrist in the air. She turned it the way she had turned 100 wrists, and she put the lady of Housevarn face down upon the black stone of Ostvale, with a knee between her shoulders, and the whole of both courts, surging to their feet and roaring. The blade rang away across the floor. Bram was safe behind her, held back by a wall of Ostvale guards, and Linnea leaned down close to the ear that had poured 7 years of gentle poison into her own. "You should not have reached for my son," she said, very low. "You, of all people, taught me what I would do to keep him." She rose and let the guards take the weight. "Take her. She does not leave this island." They dragged Odile of Varn out of the black hall, and for the first time, in the memory of that cold court, the lady was not smiling. Silence crashed back into the room. The foreign lords were pale. The alliance, whatever else it now was, would hold. And Rurik crossed the floor to her through the wreckage of it all, and he was looking at her, the way he had once looked at her over a duty roster, an age ago, as though she were the only fixed star in a moving sky. "You knew," he said quietly. "When she came to you, you knew. And you let her build the whole thing, so it would come down where every soul could see it." "I learned patience in a hard country," Linnea said. "And I learned a good deal of it watching you wait 2 years to tell me a truth I had every right to." She bent and gathered the scattered papers, squaring them in her hands. Then she straightened and looked at him, and the whole hall seemed to lean in, the way halls do around a king and a queen. "Thank you," he began, "for my life, and my name. And do not," she said, not cold this time, only tired, only true. "I did not do it for you. I did it because a woman took 7 years and a home, and a son's birthright from me, and I was not going to let her walk the earth 1 day longer with that unanswered." She held his gaze. You are free of Odile. Osvale is your ally. The East is guarded. You have everything your council sent you to win. She set the papers down. But I have felt what it is to be used by someone who swears they love me. Twice over now, and I built a whole life out of never feeling it again. And I am not certain I remember how to unbuild it. Go home, Rurik. Take your alliance and your safety, and go home, please. And she walked out of the Black Hall, past both courts, with her chin high, and her crown straight, and this time, she did not run, because a queen does not run, and because there was no longer anywhere left that she needed to run to. Rurik did not go home, not at once. There were the formalities of an alliance to see through, treaties to sign, and hostages of honor to exchange, and 100 small knots of statecraft to tie off, and it kept him in Ostvale through the tail of the winter. But he did not press her. That was the thing Linnea had not braced herself for. He had every reason in the world to press. A signed alliance, and a saved life, and a bond she could no longer pretend was dead. And he used none of it. He was simply, quietly, unfailingly there. He asked, after her counsel. He learned the names of her guards. He lost, badly and on purpose, at carved stones. Once, when a dispatch from his own council reached him pressing him to force the marriage clause, while he still held the leverage, she watched him read it by the fire, and fold it, and drop it into the flames without a single word, and he never once mentioned to her that it had come at all. She only knew, because she had long ago learned to read a room, and because the bond, open now between them, carried the plain shape of his refusals to her, whether he willed it so or not. Ansgar, her old shieldmaster, who had stood at her side since her first hard winter in the north, and had earned the right to say things no one else dared, found her on the seawall one gray morning, watching a Drenmore ship that was not quite yet. You are miserable, he observed. He is miserable. The whole court has to stand about and watch the two of you be miserable at one another. And frankly, Majesty, it is poor entertainment. He used me, Ansgar. He came a very long way to be used by, Ansgar said, and he has not once, in all these weeks, asked you for a single thing he was sent to take. A man's worth is not what his counsel writes upon a page. It is what he does when the page stops watching. He shrugged. But you are the queen. Be miserable. If it suits you, we will all keep watching. It came to a head over Bram, because of course it did. Everything true in her life came to a head over Bram. In the end, she found them again in the lower gallery, the man and the boy, but they were not playing this time. Rurik was crouched down to Bram's height, very still, and Bram was frowning up at him, with a child's terrible directness. And as Linnea came through the door, she heard her son say, "You keep looking at me. Ansgar says it is rude to stare. Why do you stare at me?" And Rurik said gently, "Because you remind me very much of someone I lost a long time ago." Linnea stopped in the doorway. Rurik looked up and found her there, and she saw in his face that the counting was done. He had an alpha's nose, and a hunter's patience, and 6 years of a boy's gray eyes in front of him, and he had reached the only sum they made. She took Bram off to his nurse. Then she came back, and shut the gallery door, and stood with her spine against it. "Say it," she said. "He is mine," Rurik said. His voice was not steady. "He is 6 years old, and he has my eyes, and he has my mother's stubborn chin. And you were carrying him when you walked onto that ship." He rose slowly. "You did not only take yourself from me, Linnea. You took my son. I have a child. I have had a child for 6 years, and I learned of it by watching him cheat at a game of stones." "Yes," she said. There was no use in anything but yes. She waited for the fury. She had braced for it for 6 years. The Alpha King's rage at an heir kept hidden across the sea. The demand, the threat, the whole weight of a crown coming down to take her son the way crowns take whatever they want. It was the thing she had run from as hard as any lie. It was the nightmare beneath all the others. It did not come. Rurik looked at her for a long moment, and what crossed his face was not rage. It was grief, and it was wonder, and beneath the both of them, terribly was resolve. "He is happy," Rurik said at last. "He is happy, and he is whole, and he is certain of his place in the world. And you did that. alone. In a country that gave you nothing and made you earn the rest at the point of a sword. He drew a breath that shook. A lesser man would take him. I have thought about it, in this last hour. Gods forgive me. I have thought about how easily I could. He is my blood and my heir, and I have every right under every law there is. He shook his head slowly. And it would break him, and it would break you, and I have spent quite enough of my life letting other people decide what those they claim to love are able to bear. He walked to the door. She did not move from it, and so for a moment they stood very close, the way they always seemed in the end, to stand, two hard people at a threshold. I will not use my son to keep his mother, he said quietly. I will not do to you the one thing your whole life has taught you to expect from me. I would like to know him one day, if ever you allow it. But I will go home, Linnea, and I will leave the both of you in peace, because it is what you have asked of me, and because loving a person means letting them not want you back. My ship sails at first light. And he stepped around her, gently, and was gone. And the fury and the apology and the 7 years all stood in Linnea's mouth, with nowhere left to go. Linnea did not sleep, which was fast becoming a habit she disliked. She lay in the dark, with the bond wide open, because she no longer knew how to close it, and no longer wanted to, and down it came the thing she had been running from since the wolf run. Rurik, awake in the East Tower, packing a life into a sea chest. She felt his grief, banked and quiet and enormous. She felt him hold the memory of a boy cheating at stones, and then, deliberately, gently, set it down, the way a man sets down a thing he has decided he is not permitted to keep. She felt him decide to be brave about it. And she understood, lying there in the dark, that she was about to do to him the very thing that had been done to her 7 years ago. She was about to let a good thing sail away into the dark on the strength of a wound, and call it pride, and call it sense, and spend the next 7 years slowly discovering it was neither. She had stood at a rail once and watched a country full of everything she loved sink away behind her, and she had told herself she was choosing it. She had not been choosing it. She had been fleeing a lie a clever woman had planted in her like a splinter. And here she was again, 7 years on and a whole crown the wiser, about to flee an entire life on the strength of a truth she had not yet let herself finish thinking through. Because here was the truth, the whole of it, that she had held at arm's length since a black wolf ran at her flank beneath the midwinter moon. He had come north under a cynical directive. That was real. And he had thrown the directive into the fire the very moment it counted, asked her for nothing, saved her son's whole future by refusing to spend it, and prepared to sail home with his heart in pieces, rather than use the one weapon that would surely have won. A man's worth is not what his counsel writes upon a page. It is what he does when the page stops watching. She was out of her bed before she had finished the thought. She did not summon a guard. She did not put on a crown. She went down through the sleeping palace and out into the freezing dark, in her plain wool, like the shield captain she had once been, and she ran, for the harbor, for the ship, for the one thing in all the world she had spent a lifetime being certain she was not allowed to want. The Drenmore ship stood at the long stone quay, with its lamps lit and its crew making ready, and Rurik was on the dock in the gray before dawn, alone, watching the black water the way a man watches a thing he is about to lose forever. He heard her before he saw her. He turned, and for a moment his face did the thing hers had done in the black hall, the whole world stopping and starting again, hope and disbelief chasing one another across it. Before he could get his kingly mask up, he did not get it up. He had stopped, somewhere in these long weeks, being able to hide from her at all. "Linnea," he said, "Your Majesty." "What?" "Be quiet," she said. She was out of breath and cold to the bone, and she had run the whole way, and now that she was here, she found that all the fine words she had built on the way down had scattered like gulls off a rail. So she said the only true thing left to her, which was the same thing she had said in the war room, the night the door came off its hinges, only turned around now, aimed the other way entirely. "Stay," she said. He went very still. "I have done the sum 100 ways," she said, and her voice was shaking and she let it shake. "And every single way I do it, I end up here, on this dock, in the dark, telling a man not to get on a ship. You came here to use me. I know that you did, and then you did not use me. You had my son, my crown, my whole life in your 2 hands, every reason to take and every right to, and you opened your hands and let it all go. Because the taking of it would have hurt me." She took a breath. "Odile spent a year teaching me that men like you do not keep women, like me." She was wrong. She was wrong about the whole of it. "You are the only man who ever tried to keep me by letting me go." Rurik crossed the space between them, and he did not touch her. Not yet. He stood a handspan away, with 7 years and an ocean and a directive and a sun all standing in the cold air between them, and he laid himself bare, the way he had never once let himself do from behind a crown. "I have loved you since a cold hunt, 2 winters before. Ever you left," he said, low and rough, and without a scrap of kingcraft anywhere in it. "I loved you through 7 years of believing you had chosen to leave me. I loved you. Across an ocean I crossed on a lie. I have loved you badly and secretly and like a coward. And I am so very tired of doing it badly." He lifted one hand slowly, and this time she did not tell him not to, and he laid it against the side of her face, the way he had tried to on a colonnade a lifetime ago and been refused. "Tell me to stay, and I will never again decide for you what you can bear. Tell me to stay, and I am yours, and Ostvale's and his, for the rest of my life. But be certain, Linnea, because I have already lost you once to a thing that was not true, and I do not think I would survive losing you to a thing that is. I am certain," she said. "For the first time in 7 years, I am certain of exactly one thing, and I ran the whole way down here, in my night clothes, to say it to you, before the tide could take it out of my mouth. Stay." And she reached up the way she had in the war room, and pulled him down to her, and this time there was no directive in his pocket, and no lie standing between them, and no 7 years of doubt. There was only the open bond, blazing, bright and mutual and true, his heart and hers pouring into one another all at once, with nothing at all held back on either side. And the cold gray harbor, and the ship that was, she decided, not going to sail after all. When she finally pulled back, it was only far enough to speak. "There is someone," she said, "who is going to want to know that you are staying. He is 6 years old, and he cheats at stones, and he has your eyes, and it is long past time the 2 of you were properly introduced." She pressed her forehead to his and felt him break, felt it go straight down the bond. 7 years of grief, cracking open at last into something far too large for a body to hold. "Come and meet your son, Rurik. Come home." They were wed at the turning of the following season, which Linnea found fitting, because it was the very season she was to have been wed in once before, a lifetime and an ocean ago. To a crown she had run from in the dark. She did not run this time, and she did not set aside her own crown for his, which surprised the courts of both kingdoms, and surprised, she thought, Rurik least of all among them. She had earned the gold on her brow in a hard country that had given her nothing, and she was not about to lay it down for any man alive, even the one she loved. So they made a stranger thing than a marriage of 2 people. They made an alliance of 2 thrones, that happened also to be a marriage. Ostvale and Drenmore bound as equals, and their son, the heir to both, a boy with a smith girl's chin and a wolf king's eyes, who would one day wear 2 crowns and, God's willing, run from neither. Bram, when told that the man who lost so cheerfully at stones was in truth his father, took the news with a child's magnificent calm, and asked whether it meant he might now have a wolfhound. He was told. He considered it an excellent trait. Rurik wept at the vows. Linnea had known that he would. She very nearly did not, and it was a near thing, and the bond gave her away to him entirely, and he laughed at her through his own tears, the way she knew by now he always would, and she found, standing in the light before both her courts, that she no longer cared in the slightest who saw. "You found me wearing a crown," she said to him quietly. "When it was done, you were meant to find me broken. I am sorry to have disappointed you so. I have never in the whole of my life been less disappointed," he said. "And then, because he could never once leave a thing well enough alone, you did propose to me on a dock, in your nightclothes, in front of a full Drenmore crew. There will be songs, Linnea. I have no power on this earth to stop the songs." "Let them sing," said the Queen of Ostvale. And she kissed the King of Drenmore, and for once in her life, she did not argue the point.